I had 2 weeks vacation time mandatory per year, and an extra 2 weeks if I met my performance reviews, which was basically a given in the ESPD. It didn't look good taking vacation days so soon, but my career would get over it. And besides, it wasn't like Bogdan was going to complain I wasn't around. We had fun together, Zach and me. Played a bit of Mario Kart, a bit of FIFA, some of the new Zero-G VR games from Camco. I wasn't great with kids, but at least back then I was young enough to remember being one. I ordered lunch from the Fedrin place just down the corridor from my apartment, and dinner from the Moroccan kitchen in the spaceport terminal. The confirmation from his grandfather came in on the second day. Kemazak was coming to take his grandson home and taking the fastest passenger liner. Scheduled arrival time was at the end of the week, and I breathed a sigh of relief. All I had to do was sit tight for a few more days. There was no sign anyone was looking for Zach. No one had come to the department offices asking about him, and there were no Kevalites hanging around my neighborhood all of a sudden. I started to become a little less paranoid, and when the delivery runners dropped off the food, I didn't bother shoving the sofa back in front of the door. They came for him on the third night, 3:30 in the morning or thereabouts. The bars had long since closed, and even the whores had finished for the night. The whole station was either asleep or unconscious, except for a few unlucky souls who'd made bad choices in life, like criminals, cops, and ER doctors. There was just the slightest click, and the door opened a fraction. Then long fingers slipped through the gap and silently dragged it open. They didn't set of my alarms. I know I left them active that night, but someone must have hacked them somehow, because when the first Kevalite stepped through the door, they didn't raise a peep. A second and a third followed him, long legs softly padding across my living room, heading for the bedroom door. Lights. The low-wattage, energy-saving bulbs flickered asthmatically into life, adding a little definition to the shadow puppet theater. 3 Kevalites, frozen in mid-stride, dressed like EVA workers with their helmets on to hide their identities, each with a long knife in his hand, and me sitting in an armchair facing the door, pistol leveled at them. I nodded a greeting. Their sun visors were down, so all I could see was my own reflection looking back at me, but I looked them dead in the eyes all the same. No one moved. I sighed. The way I see it, you've got 3 choices. The first is to drop your knives and wait here, nice and calm, until my backup arrives to arrest you. The second is, you come at me and I shoot you dead. The third is you make a run for it and I still shoot you dead and say you were coming at me. Maybe not what a little goody two-shoes detective should do, but they'd come to murder a child. The only ways I'd let them leave my apartment was in handcuffs or a body bag. They hesitated. I thought about killing them all, surrender or no surrender. Then the leader dropped his knife and the other 2 followed a fraction of a second behind, and I was so tempted. But I'd be the one who'd have to clean the blood off the furniture. Turn around to face the wall and put your hands on it. Palms flat and... The leader pounced, drawing a second knife from his belt in the same instant as he leapt towards me. I calmly put 2 bullets in his chest. I may have been young, but I wasn't born yesterday. Kevalites didn't just give up without a fight, and faking a surrender was the oldest trick in the book. That was actually one of the few pieces of useful advice Bogdan had given me. When a Kevalite looks like he's beat, that's when he's most dangerous. Maybe the Kevalites should have learned a little about humans before they came to my apartment. When a human is protecting a child, that's when we're most dangerous. The lead Kevalite twitched for a moment, then lay still. I raised my gun to the other 2. Anyone else want to try option 2? Neither of them did. My colleagues arrived only a few minutes later. Credit where credit's due, ESPD might not be winning any prizes for police work, but that night they brought their A game, a full squad of 10 guys in tactical gear, armed to the teeth. If I had needed their help, well, they still probably wouldn't have been in time to stop me getting carved up like a ham, but they might have saved Zach. When they got there, they stormed in only to find 1 dead Kevalite and 2 others up against the wall, my gun on their backs. But I appreciated the effort. Oh, and they found me shaking like a leaf and almost hyperventilating. Adrenaline's a hell of a drug. First time I'd killed anyone, and first time I'd had someone try to kill me. Didn't enjoy it at the time, but it served me in good stead when I signed up to fight in the war. A lot of guys didn't make it back because they got that combat rush and either froze up or flipped out. But I already knew what it felt like. Look on the bright side, right? There was another bright side. For once, the brass got off their backsides as well. Kevolite on Kevolite violence. Well, that's just how they are, you know. Not much you can do about it, but attempted murder of a police officer. That lit a fire under their cushy desk chairs, and protecting me meant protecting Zach. By morning, Kevolite town was swarming with ESPD. If Razave had been feeling lonely without his clan around him, he wasn't anymore because virtually every one of them on Europa Station was hauled in for questioning, then charged with whatever we could find to charge them with. A few of them were cut loose. Maybe they were even innocent. But most of them had something we could pin on them, even if it was only illegal narcotics or stolen goods. We talked over finding a safe house for Zach and drawing up a proper plan to keep him safe, including a rota for officers to watch him. But the kid was determined not to be separated from me, and I was determined not to let him out of my sight, especially after last night. So it was decided everything would run smoother if I continued being team leader for his security arrangements. We stayed in a different hotel every day. 2 guys in uniform in the room with us and 2 plainclothes guys outside watching the door. I brought the PlayStation XX5 with me, and we had a Mario Kart tournament with the uniforms during the day. Then we ordered takeout. Pizza, actually, which took me back to when I was Zach's age. I hadn't tried it since I left Earth. My grandparents swore by it, but it must have gone out of fashion sometime before I was born, because the only time I had it was when I was at their house. It was greasier than I remembered, but Zach seemed to quite like it, even if he did get cheese on the PlayStation gloves. There were no games on the night shift. I finally got to sleep, but the 4 officers on duty kept a careful eye out the whole night. I still kept my gun under my pillow just in case. The days ticked down, and until finally it was Saturday. Departure day. Zach's grandfather was arriving in the morning, and they'd be heading back to Kaval on the same transport just a few hours later. It was over. The arrests, the security precautions. They'd worked. So why the tight feeling in my chest? Do I have to go back to Kaval? Zach asked me as I was dividing up the pancakes for breakfast. I paused for a moment, then asked, "Don't you want to go back to your home planet?" Zach shrugged. "I don't remember Kaval. Dad brought me here when I was a few months old. The workshop was home before Dad." He stopped, trying to find the words. Kevalites aren't particularly articulate. Their kids are taught that actions speak louder than words. But Zach had something he wanted to say. "I don't have a home now, but I like it here." Another pause, and I thought he'd finished, but then he added, "With you." And that was when I realized I didn't want him to go. I'd spent so much time focused on the single goal of getting him off Europa Station that I hadn't stopped to consider that might not be what I really wanted. I thought about it. I really thought about it. Zach needed me, and the last couple of days, well, I'd started to like having him in my life. There had to be a way I didn't have to say goodbye to him. I went over all kinds of different scenarios in my head, ways I could make it work. But in the end, I was a junior detective working long and awkward hours on a not particularly impressive salary, a 1-bedroom apartment that I barely saw, and no friends or family within 1,000,000 kilometers who could help me out, and I might have found a way to do it despite all that. But I knew there was one thing I just couldn't do for Zach. "I'm sorry," I told him. "I'd like you to stay too, but Razave's clan, there are too many of them around here. You'd never be safe. I'd do my best to protect you, but sooner or later they'd find a way to get to you." I sighed. "The only way you can grow up without constantly having to watch your back is if you do it far away from here, you understand?" Zach nodded, because he did understand, and God, that made me sad. Europa Station had 2 spaceport terminals in those days, before the military added a couple more. There was the old crappy one where ships from the inner system docked, and there was the shiny new one where the interstellar liners came in. I guess we wanted to give aliens the impression that the station was less of a shithole than it really was. That was humanity in general back then, trying to give the impression that we weren't the galaxy's version of a third-world country, and not pulling it off very well. To save Zach's grandfather from having to go through customs and quarantine checks, he was staying in the disembarkation lounge and we were taking Zach to him. We had 4 officers to escort us to the terminal, and a couple more were waiting for us there, just in case. Most of Razavay's clan was still in lockup, but we might have missed someone, and this would be their last chance to try anything. I wasn't too worried, but better safe than sorry. Zach was silent as we walked through the corridors to the spaceport, and although I wanted to talk, I couldn't find the words. The rest of Europa Station carried on around us as if it was a completely normal day. Then suddenly we were at the terminal, with its soaring arches and geodesic glass panels looking out to the stars, and the rest of our security detail was there, and there was no time left to say all the things I'd wanted to say. We waited a minute while the team leader, Lieutenant Santos, checked with spaceport security that we were clear to go through. Bogdan was there, in a trench coat that looked like it had been made in Bulgaria back when it was still communist. I thought it was to hide his hip flask until I saw he'd palmed one of those tiny bottles you get in hotel minibars. To give him credit, if I hadn't been looking for it, I'd never have noticed. He was a professional at some things, at least. He could have taken up stage magic, the way he made that bottle appear by his lips and then vanish. I saw Santos coming back to give us the go-ahead, and I knelt down beside Zach. "I guess this is it, kid. Time to say goodbye." "I don't want to." He was usually self-contained as Europa herself, with her miles-thick, icy armor protecting the oceans underneath. But this time there was a quaver in his voice, a bit of emotion breaking through. "I know. I don't want to say goodbye either, but this is what we need to do to make sure you're safe. Can't you come with me? Kaval isn't a place for someone like me, you know that. If I tried to go to Kaval on my own, I'd probably be dead within a week. Not exactly tourist-friendly. Even our embassy there had to rely on heavily armed mercenaries." Zach nodded. He knew how things worked back home, even if he didn't remember it. "Maybe when I'm older, and I'm big enough to protect you, you could come visit me? I'd like that." I smiled, knowing it would never happen. Zach was going to grow up a proper Kevalite, and by the time he was an adult, he'd be as deep in their culture as Razavay. Maybe not quite such a bastard. Zach was a good kid, but he'd have to be just as hard. There was no other way to survive on Kaval. This would be our last goodbye, but at least this way he would survive. "Come on, your grandfather's waiting," I said. I was about to get up, but on impulse I threw my arms around him and hugged him tight. I was probably the only person apart from his father who'd ever hugged him, but after a second's hesitation he did the same, and while I had him tucked against me, shoulder under my chin, I happened to glance up, out through the glass domes into the vastness of the cosmos, at the scattering of diamonds across the endless, endless night. Kaval was out there somewhere, and soon Zach would be too, safe and, I hoped, happy. Then I saw the flicker of movement on the gantries crisscrossing through the top of the dome. Only a small flash of light caught on a bit of metal, almost like just another star twinkling. I spun, pulling Zach off his feet and hauling him around. I shouted a warning, and just as I began to dive to the ground, I felt something shove me in the back, so I had to put my hand out to break my fall. Keeping Zach beneath me, I looked round, trying to find the shooter again. Something stung my arm right by where Zach's head was, and I rolled onto my side to keep my body facing the direction of the shooter. Another punch in my back, knocking the breath out of me. The other cops were fanning out, drawing their guns. With my back to the shooter, I couldn't see what they were doing, but I could hear the whine of their guns' capacitors charging every time they fired. They must have forced the shooter into cover because no more shots came. And then I saw the other shooter, coming out of the crowd, drawing a snub-nosed machine pistol compact enough to fit inside a pocket, designed to spray down everything within 10 feet. Me, Zach, and the cops distracted by the shooter up in the gantries who all had their backs to him. I was lying on my holster. There was no way I could draw in time. I watched the muzzle come up and hugged Zach tight against me. "Sorry, kid, I tried." And then in came goddamn Bogdan, with a pump-action shotgun that appeared from nowhere, advancing on the Kevalite hitman like the Red Army on Berlin, trench coat flapping around him. His first blast clipped Kevalit in the shoulder, and a burst from the machine pistol went wild. Above even all the tourists screaming, the shotgun shells roared like a cannon. No neat, clean magnets. That was gunpowder. The Kevalite tried to turn on him, but Bogdan's next shot took him in the chest and he still wasn't done. Step, fire, rack, step, fire, rack. The hitman was blasted off his feet, crashing back into a souvenir stand. Bogdan beckoned at me. I needed to get up off the floor and get to cover. I tried to stand, but my left leg wasn't working properly. I looked down and saw the blood, then noticed the bullet holes in the paving. That burst from the machine pistol had been a lot closer than I realized. I started limping, half covering Zach and half leaning on him, heading for a big concrete planter filled with ferns. I was pretty sure the Kevalite sprawled over the plushy Pokemon wouldn't be getting up again. Bogdan had permanently revoked his visa. But there was still the sniper up above. Something took a chunk out of the paving just ahead of me, and I lurched to one side. Bogdan was walking backwards beside me, reloading his shotgun and cursing under his breath in Bulgarian. The planter was only a few paces away. Limping along, my legs started to give out, and I almost fell. Just at that moment, I heard something whiz past my ear. Somehow, I found the strength to push on. The shotgun came up to Bogdan's shoulder, and there was a scream like a jet engine. I looked round just as he fired again, and a mini-rocket with a tail of flame shot out, arcing upwards to burst like a nova up among the gantries. Long-range stun grenade. I'd read about them in the police handbook, but I'd never seen them used before. Hell, I didn't even think we had any in the armory. Bogdan must have had his own personal stash. I dragged my leg the last few steps, shoved Zach down, then almost collapsed on top of him. Pressed my back up against the planter and finally drew my pistol. Not much good now. I couldn't hit the sniper at this distance even if my vision wasn't blurry. I looked down at my leg. Damn, that really was a lot of blood. Zach was looking at me with fear in his eyes, poor kid. First he loses his father, then not one but 2 assassination attempts. Hell of a week for a 10-year-old. Don't worry, we're safe here, I tried to say, but I was slurring the words. Just sit tight, keep your head down, it'll be okay. Zach had taken his jacket off and had it pressed against my thigh. He was getting blood all over it. I tried to push it away before it got ruined, but somehow my arms didn't want to work now. Don't worry, it's fine, I told him. Just stay in cover. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. I looked around over my shoulder, trying to check if the sniper had repositioned. I could see the dome, and beyond it the endless night of space scattered with stars. The stars seemed to be going out, the darkness swallowing them one by one, until at last there was nothing but the black and silence.